After the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed. President Lincoln freed the slaves in 1863, but it took 2 more years to make it official with the passing of the 13th Amendment. The civil rights of the freed slaves were in the 14th Amendment. The 15th Amendment guaranteed African Americans the right to vote, but for the next 100 years, for all intents and purposes, this was denied to them in most of the South. Racism was very much alive in the groups like the KKK. The Ku Klux Klan was originally founded in the winter of 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee, by 6 Confederate veterans. Ku Klux was derived from the Greek kukalos, meaning circle, and the English word clan. At the start, the Klan was more of a secret club than a terrorist organization, but matters progressively got worse. The Klan grew quickly and attracted many former Civil War soldiers and generals. Many of the Klan's early activities consisted of riding around late at night dressed in white outfits to look like ghosts. The first main tactic of the Ku Klux Klan was just to scare African Americans away. That tactic soon changed. There were violent attacks on many blacks in the South. People were beaten severely, shot, hanged, and women were raped. These actions helped bring about the Enforcement Acts, commonly known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, or the Civil Rights Act of 1871. Section 2 of the Act provided criminal sanctions and a civil damages action for the conspiracy to commit a range of offenses. These offenses included attempting to overthrow the government, intimidating witnesses or parties to legal action, using threat or force to influence jurors, or going on the highway in disguise to deprive others of the exercise of constitutional rights guaranteed by the 14th and 15th Amendments. Though not trying to, the Ku Klux Klan reformed history in a different way. They brought on civil rights, and their actions caused opposite but equal reactions. The mentality of the South was brought on by hateful groups such as the KKK. They made people think that hatred was necessary, that blacks were not going to go peacefully. The law slowly started to conform to that way of thinking. In the Plessy versus Ferguson case of 1896, the Supreme Court set the precedent that as long as facilities were equal for blacks, they could be separate from whites.
The reaction to this was the civil rights movement. Separate but equal was not the same as equal rights for everyone. Racism and segregation were still alive and strong in the United States well into the 20th century. There was a battle between the races. Riots broke out, people were beaten severely and even killed. However, on May 17th of 1954, there was a turnaround in the ruling of Brown versus the Board of Education. The Supreme Court unanimously declared that school segregation was unconstitutional, overturning the separate but equal precedent. The people and the states fought against the ruling, and most kept segregation in schooling, but it was a step in the right direction. December of 1955, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his first civil rights speech in response to the Montgomery bus boycotts. Dr. King believed in a nonviolent approach to gaining equal rights for everyone, and he practiced what he preached. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech reached people everywhere, just confirming Dr. King's place as the spokesperson for the movement. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 and was also named Man of the Year by Time magazine. April 4th of 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. Even in his death, Dr. King's legacy still remained, and as the movement continued, people started to see that America needed a change. In Dr. King's words, "The Black Revolution is more than a civil rights movement. It's forcing America to face up to its problems of racism, poverty, militarism, and materialism.
If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
On the other side, the Black Panthers, a group founded by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale in October of 1966, disagreed with Dr. King's philosophy. They felt that blacks needed to fight with the same force that was being used against them. They feared a continuance of oppression after King's death, and they were heavily armed in fear of attacks against them. Meanwhile, the struggle for equality continued. John F. Kennedy, president at the time, was concerned with the images he was seeing in the media. He feared race riots and race wars spreading to cities all over the U.S., so he vowed to take a stand. He proposed a civil rights law to be passed. The law would make sure that any person with a 6th grade education would have the right to vote. It would also eliminate discrimination in public places such as hotels, restaurants, entertainment facilities, and retail establishments. However, in 1963, President Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. It was his successor, Lyndon Johnson, who put the presidential signature to the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. The passing of these two acts was one of the biggest moments and biggest wins for the civil rights movement. Even today, there are still changes that could be made in America, and the KKK is still around, but for the most part, rights are equal between the races. Over time, racism has lessened, and America has grown more accepting. In fact, Barack Obama is the first African American president of these United States. Civil rights has come a long way since the Ku Klux Klan, but America still has a ways to go.